So my name's Martin Lyons. I'm a farmer in Cambridgeshire, but I'm also the UK chair for the Nature Friendly Farming Network, a network of farmers right across the UK with individual steering groups sitting in each country, trying to champion what farmers are doing for nature, biodiversity and profitable farming systems to other farmers, to public and to policymakers. Because as we know, there are many farmers out there doing amazing things, and we want to help give them a voice and make sure we go on this transition and deliver a really positive, fair outcome, not just for farming, but for biodiversity and our climate. Our session is titled, What Are We Waiting For? Farming for Climate Action. Many organisations and companies and farming groups have all got definitions of when they want to get to net zero, whether it be 2040, 2050, 2030. But as farmers, we have the ability to take action now and deliver solutions on our landscape that are not only good for our environment and for biodiversity, but also the profitability of our businesses. We know we're in a nature and a biodiversity crisis. Our weather patterns are going to change ever so much over the next years, and we need to keep a viable farming business going, delivering the food that feeds the nation, but also the landscape that the nation enjoys and delivers the solutions to tackle our biodiversity and climate challenges. And as farmers, we are managing that landscape and we have that abilities. We are seeing so much change happening with various farming policies right across the UK, and they're all going at different paces and are delivering different solutions and rewarding farmers in different ways. So we need to embrace that, but not wait for that to come. Take and do the actions we can. That twin crisis we face, with agriculture across the UK contributing 12% to the UK's total greenhouse emissions, and a system that is driving huge biodiversity loss in the past. We need solutions now and at scale and at pace. And as farmers, we can deliver those solutions. We have the ability, the knowledge and the tools, but we need to empower ourselves and our fellow farmers to take action. So this morning we're going to have some presentations of the report we're launching today from Ellie, where we bring some of that data and information together and showing some infographics. And then we're going to hear from two farmers, one from Wales and Hywel, and one from Scotland, Denise, and then the solutions they're doing. And then we'll move on into a panel session, and I'll hand over to Alison, who will be chairing that. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Ellie, and she'll introduce herself and the work she's been doing to pull this report together. So over to you, Ellie. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I'm just going to share my screen with you all. Great. So I'm Ellie Brodie. I'm a public policy and research consultant specialising in land management, and I've been fortunate enough to be working with the Nature Friendly Farming Network over the last couple of months to pull together evidence and thinking in a report that's being launched today called Farming for Climate Action. So I'm going to talk through some of the report findings over the next few minutes. So really what this report is aiming to do is provide some practical suggestions for farmers and land managers on the road to net zero and climate resilience. The starting point for this work is that change is coming. In fact, it's already here, as government targets, policies, retailer requirements and consumer preferences are showing. But whilst progress is being made on post-CAP incentive schemes, a coherent vision and integrated policy on food, farming, land use, environment and trade is missing. And as Martin has already alluded to, there's quite a lot of confusion out there. The latest stats from DEFRA tell us that for those farmers not taking action to reduce their emissions, and there are just under half of farmers not taking action currently, the most common reason given was that they were unsure about what to do, as there were too many conflicting views on the issue. Similarly, recent research for the Nature Friendly Farming Network found that whilst 92% of farmers are concerned about the effects of climate change, they want more guidance on what to do. So this really provides a rationale for today's new report, which aims to encourage farming for climate action. It highlights the direction of travel policy-wise across the 4 UK countries. It highlights the main sources of emissions in agriculture and also the benefits of working with nature. to help capture carbon and become more resilient to the effects of climate change. And finally, it gives suggestions for practical action that farmers and land managers can take on their road to net zero. So before I move on to the actions, I'm going to spend just a moment on the main sources of emissions from agriculture, as this provides quite a significant part of the rationale for the proposed actions in the report. But in real brief, in arable systems, the main emissions stem from the manufacture and application of nitrogen fertiliser, which emits nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide being 300 times more warming than carbon dioxide, so a significant issue. And for livestock-based systems, the main emissions are methane produced via enteric fermentation for ruminants and emissions associated with feed production for pig, poultry, and in certain circumstances for dairy systems too. So that's a real headline on the main emissions from those two sort of farming systems. Obviously that's simplified, but gives you a bit of a flavour for why we are proposing the actions that we are. Now, the other side of the coin is the potential of managing land so that it captures carbon and gives other benefits using nature-based solutions. So moving on to the 8 areas of action. So you'll see hopefully the infographic in front of you that we've launched today. Now, this covers kind of 8 primary areas. And these areas of action were arrived at based on evidence reviewed across different farming systems. And in doing this review, we were bearing in mind 3 headline things really. Firstly, the potential impact of the action to reduce emissions and or capture carbon. Secondly, the cost and ease of undertaking different actions. And thirdly, the potential for other additional benefits, such as providing resilience to market changes and boosts to biodiversity. Now, we're not proposing that these are the only actions that can be taken. We're not putting this analysis forward as a major scientific study. It's a practical guide intended to be a support to act now. We're also acutely aware that many of you will be doing many of these actions already. And the intention really is to just provide these practical suggestions covering a spectrum of actions from some fairly basic good practice, such as doing soil analysis, through to really kind of going for it with whole system change, be this organic or pasture fed, for example. So to talk through the evidence reviewed across these different farming systems, the 8 areas for action really cover, can be divided into 4 areas, which are mainly about emission reductions. I'll talk about those first. 3 about capturing carbon and being more resilient to climate change, and 1 about taking a whole farm approach to planning and management. The actions in the infographic, and there's more information on these in the report itself, are kind of presented in ascending order of difficulty or challenge. So action 1 is considered less challenging than action 3. And there is some crossover between the different sort of areas of action as well, as you'll see. But I'd just like to briefly talk through these different areas, starting with fertiliser use. So to start with, we propose creating a nutrient management plan to identify how to minimise artificial fertiliser application. Secondly, locking nitrogen into soil by using catch and cover crops. And thirdly, using organic manures and slurries instead of nitrogen-based fertiliser. And some of the benefits that these changes could bring, besides emissions reductions, include being less vulnerable to market forces, as the current high price of nitrogen fertiliser can kind of tell us. Moving on to crop management, we propose using catch and cover crops to reduce nitrate leaching, reduce soil erosion, improve soil structure, and provide a nitrogen source to the following crop. Also cultivating land in spring rather than autumn, and increasing diversity and duration into your crop rotations by introducing legumes in arable rotations and grass layers and livestock onto arable farms. Now, some of the benefits that this can bring are, for example, crop rotations really help to prevent disease and pest outbreaks in annual crops. They kind of break that cycle. And also another benefit, and there are many that we go into in more detail in the report, might be complying with regulation on soil erosion, leaching and runoff. Now, I've already started talking about soil, so moving on to soil management, we propose carrying out soil analysis, mapping and testing trying to increase soil organic matter by using animal manure and certified composts in place of nitrogen fertiliser, and also reducing soil movement and disturbance. And the benefits that soil management can bring include, well, there's incentives available now through England's Sustainable Farm Incentive around soil management, and future schemes in devolved nations are likely to place more emphasis on good soil husbandry as well. And also, as we know, healthy soil is ultimately a really long-term asset. Now, moving on to livestock management, actions include introducing legumes and herbal leys into grassland, thereby reducing the need for nitrogen fertiliser, improving animal health and breeding, and breed selection to increase fertility, growth rates and reduce morbidity. We also propose using low input native breeds, which can be outwintered, and matching stocking rates to the natural carrying capacity of the land. Thirdly, considering changing feeding techniques and feed sources by using homegrown protein sources for animal feed, considering co- and byproducts in livestock feeds, and potentially new technology as well, such as precision feeding. Reducing the use of imported feedstocks is another big win here. Some of the benefits that this can bring include adapting to changes in demand. So we know that consumers are moving towards a desire to eat less but better meat, and also higher welfare animal products as well, and also being prepared for this changing kind of marketplace, with retailer and supplier requirements for net zero production methods becoming ever more prevalent. Now, just briefly going to move over to look more at the kind of carbon capture and sequestration side of things. So we highlight trees and hedgerows as being really important here, filling in gaps in trees and in hedges, managing existing woodlands, and also planting new trees and hedgerows. Habitat management, I mean, this is a massive area because there's such a broad range and variety of habitats. So we go really with the principles around habitat management of starting off by identifying and recording your farm habitat, creating a habitat map, and letting this guide future action on improving and extending existing habitats and creating and connecting them as well. Habitat management bringing a huge range of benefits, providing resilience to climate change being one. We talk about water management in terms of buffering and protecting watercourses, planning and managing to prevent flooding and drought, and re-wetting and creating new wetlands. Really, the water management side of things is enormously about providing that resilience to climate change and a changing climate, but also huge biodiversity benefits that comes from looking after the freshwater environment. Now, finally, there's a big area that we're interested in, which is a kind of standalone area really, is around whole farm management. So this is looking at the whole farm system. Now, the different ways to do this, at the beginning of the journey, this might be about sitting down and trying to create a whole farm plan, looking at the existing opportunities and constraints for your land and for the surrounding land. Secondly, working towards your maximum sustainable output is another consideration, and the NFFN and Navigal Associates have done some really great work on this. So I'd encourage you to look on the Nature Friendly Farming Network website and the report Nature Means Business there, which really considers how profitability can be linked to your partnership with nature. And finally, really reviewing your farming system and thinking about which system may best serve you for the future. And this might be something like going for kind of whole system change, pasture-fed livestock, agroforestry, organic, agroecology, even paludiculture. You know, there's some really exciting integrated systems out there, and one of those might be for you, or a combination of them. So really, that's what I'd like to say, I think, on presenting this report. And I won't go into any more detail now, but I'll look forward to taking questions from the panel. So thank you for listening, and please do download it and share it.
Thank you, Ellie. And yeah, do after this session, do go look on the Nature Friendly Farming website and download the report and have a read through it. There's some really fascinating information in there. And what I find most fascinating is the differences that are happening across the UK and the different paces that are going. And how can we encourage some of those governments that aren't going as quickly to actually start taking those actions and deliver, so we can level up a bit more right across the UK and empower farmers to get on with this journey and start taking that thing. So thanks ever so much, Ellie. Next, I'm going to hand over to Hywel, and he's going to give us a presentation for a few minutes about the actions he's been taking on in his journey to deliver solutions. So Hywel, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Good morning, everyone. Just bear with me while I share my screen. This is Escarllaethu. I farm in the Brecon Beacons, in a village called Myddfai. It's the upland hill and beef and sheep farm, and predominantly grass. Sometimes I will put some root crops in. I'm trying to move away from soil disturbance. So what did we used to do on Escarllaethu? So we used to use a lot of fertilizer, bagged fertilizer, sprayed off fields to plant root crops and cereals, etc. We were heavy users of feed. So by cutting back on feed from about 15, 18 ton, we're back to about 3 ton. We only use a little bit of feed around lambing time when grass is slow growing in the spring. I've stopped spraying off fields now and planting root crops. This is the first year I've done that, so see how it goes. We were using 15 to 20 ton of bag of fertilizer, just standard 20-10-10. We never used to do soil testing, but now we've moved on. So we've cutting back on fertilizer. My pH has risen, obviously, because fertilizer acidic. My farmyard manure now is my new nitrogen. And so what we do now is we've created ponds. We did these in the agri-environment scheme, create habitat, wildlife areas, and then it's surprising what's coming out, all sorts of ducks, geese, all of a sudden everything turns up, voles, etc. Lots of habitat. Helps with water flow to a nearby stream as well. I'm planted a lot of herbalaise, clovers. Big believer in both of these. The herbalaise, they deep root in, help not just with feeding my animals, water control and runoff of my farm with deep rooting. These clovers are fantastic. They're just my nitrogen fixer. Just feeding animals is much easier with just good quality grass and clovers. Big believers of plantain and chicory. It seems to do better than any other herbalaise on a farm. I have tried 19, 20 varieties and mix. They all work well for the first year or two, but I tend to find the chicory and the plantain outperform anything else. We got big issue with sheep. They do nibble a bit hard, so spring is quite tough on a hill farm like this. We've gone from cutting our hedges every year to manage them differently. 3 to 4 years before I cut some hedges, let them grow taller, sort of thing. Not just for wildlife creations or biodiversity, shelter with in hot summers and wet winters, from wind, rain. And it just makes sense to me. I do have a challenge with hedging contractors that they don't quite understand what I'm trying to do achieve. Be great to have policy around this. Create wildlife corridors, so rather than just fence off required 2 meters and plant a hedge, sometimes I try and make 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever meters width, sort of thing. Any awkward bits on a farm we've left for rewilding. All my boundaries now are double fenced. So we've got just biosecurity and just great habitat for wildlife and biodiversity, shelter, and we're looking after tree source. We utilize some timber on a farm, so it's good to have a managed source of timber. I've moved from the traditional continental breeds that many farmers in the UK have sort of tend to keep. I've chosen the beef Shorthorn over the Angus and Hereford predominantly, just because I like the colour sort of thing. The red and white cattle just quite appealing to the eye, and I just find that they work well for me. I got a herd of Hereford cross Frisian cows, and put a Shorthorn bull on them. So the aim is to create a crossbred cow that's got the Shorthorn and the Hereford in it. So I do some conservation grazing. So these Highland cattle, I've got a herd of Highland cattle as well. They spend pretty much all their life on the hill. So we've got a common land adjoining a farm. And so I think it's important as upland farms that got common hill rights to manage these hills in a different way. And by introducing cattle, they graze different to the sheep. And it seems to working well. So we do some conservation grazing on other people's farms as well. So don't know, that works pretty good as well. So it gives my farmer a little break as well. And it's not just keeping animals for protein production. They are tools in the box. I like to use my animals as tools rather than just protein production. I see the protein production is a byproduct of managing the habitat and the biodiversity and helping restore what we need to do. And you can't argue these Highland cattle are quite photogenic. I've invested in the no fence collar system. So it's a game changer. It's allowed me to manage the cattle on the hill and target graze the millennia, especially where we need to graze. The trouble with sheep, they are more selective with their grazing habits, and hopefully these cattle will in time help sheep survive better on these hills. So the no fence technology is basically a GPS electric fence system. And so I get a signal back, messages back to my phone, and they tell me where they are and what they're doing and how they are grazing. The GPS fence just controls where they're grazing. And there are some people a bit worried about the shock impact on these cattle. But once they're trained, which usually takes about 4 days, very rare, they actually get through the fence. I think out of 20 callers, I think there's only about 4 of these cattle have actually broken through the fence once they've been trained. So they get an audible warning, and then that just keeps them away. But already I'm seeing the benefits of grazing these cattle in certain areas where I'd find difficult to keep them previously. So what's new here? So we've seen a lot of different birds appear. So we've got skylarks, meadow pipits, curlews, golden plovers, various insects I've never seen before, which is fantastic. I'm struggling to give a name to everything. I know those are skylark eggs. And yeah, so orchids have appeared on some conservation grazing land that my cattle are doing. So we don't, once the orchids are in flower, we just leave them flower. We won't graze until the orchids die back. And we just work with the landowner and manage it as he wants and as well as I want and as nature intends to. Here's a flock of golden plovers that's seen on the mountain last year, which is, you know, first time ever I've actually seen them sort of thing, which is great to see them coming back. A lot of people ask what I do with my Highland cattle. So I tend to sell all the beef in the store steers through the farmers market, direct to consumer. And they might be up to 5 years old before I actually slaughter them and butcher them. And the consumers, quite interesting, nobody's ever asked me what grade that animal was. They're quite interested in what breed it was. But they won't be so keen if I said if it's a continental breed. But some of them just walk away when I tell them that, if I told them that. But they do like the native breeds. Grass-fed is really important, so I'm working with nature, and when I tell them about how I'm using it as a tool, they love it. I sell lamb, mutton and hogget as well in markets directing consumers, and hogget and mutton outperform lamb. I think it's important we shorten a food chain. Basically, I'm trying to cut out a lot of this process sort of thing. So from field to fork is quite important to me. We've got a long way to go, but I think we need maybe assistance in local abattoirs could help doing this. So yeah. So basically that's me at Escarlleifdi, and that's our farm on a nice sunny day, covered in trees, and that's my village just in the background, and just pretty much my community sort of thing. And so as long as I can sort of feed my family and community, I feel like I'm doing the right thing and producing habitat area and restoring biodiversity and tackling climate change. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
And thank you. I think it's fascinating to see your pictures are so photogenic, but also how you're transitioning your farm. And this is about a journey, and how you use your livestock to manage the environment for environmental benefits, and flowers and other bits. And it's great to see. So next, I'd like to hand over to Denise and have your perspective on your journey then, please.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks very much. Thank you very much, everybody. We farm 670 acres in the southern Scottish borders, mostly livestock, mostly cattle. We have a small amount of arable for forage crops. So 150 suckler herd, some sheep and some pigs. We have an on-farm butchery that we sell direct to consumers, and we're also organic. So that's a quick introduction. In the past, yes, until we went organic in 2005, we were agrochemically dependent farmers, though we were low input farmers. So we would spray fertilizers. We were also dependent on grain feeding for our ruminants. We had 3 tractors and a forklift. We ploughed, and so that was a conventional system. That's what we were in the past. What we've changed to really since 2005, we went organic, extensive habitat creation. We now only feed grass. We're Pasture for Life members. We don't feed any grain to our cattle. We've changed our grazing system, so we've actually divided our fields into small paddocks, and we rotationally mob graze groups of 10 cattle in 10-acre paddocks, 3 days grazing, 30 days rest. And we've seen an incredible improvement in our grass utilization efficiency. And what we have now, we're saving nearly £70,000 a year on no agrochemicals, the less fuel use, less tractor use, and more efficient grazing. So there's a very big plus. We are dependent on our herbal and clover lays for conditioning our soils. It helps us to capture nitrogen. We don't use any agrochemicals, as I've mentioned. We depend on the nitrogen fixing capacity of clover to fix nitrogen. And also, I like to think of carbon stabilization. I think carbon fixing is not necessarily very accurate. I think really our task is to stabilize carbon and to cycle it more efficiently. And every farm on the land has got the capacity to become more functional in terms of stabilizing and cycling carbon, which we are doing, I believe, effectively in terms of our grass lays and our herbal lays and our use of clover. And the biodiversity has increased as a result in relation to insect biodiversity and improved dunging from our cattle onto grazed pastures. And we're also ivermectin, we use very few pesticides and are just about ivermectin free. So our dung provides a very important food source for invertebrates and for birds. We also defer grassland, which means that we actually leave it as standing hay, so you get deeper rooting, deeper soil conditioning, and more effective photosynthesizing and carbon capturing. Hedges and edges. In the last 15 to 20 years, we've planted 6 kilometers of hedges. That's nearly 50,000 plants in that time. That doesn't include the new woodlands that we've planted. So hedgerows are extremely important for biosecurity, so particularly along our boundaries. So there's no nose to nose between livestock, very, very important for livestock health management, sheltering as well, sheltering not just livestock, but wildlife, sheltering soils from erosion, also providing habitat for increased biodiversity. And also, again, hedgerows stabilizing carbon. Hedgerows and scrub are actually more effective more quickly in terms of stabilizing and cycling carbon. They're a very important tool that we've got as farmers to improve our carbon stabilizing and ecosystem function of our farms. We did have continental cattle when we first started farming 30 years ago. We now have pedigree Aberdeen Angus, so we're all Aberdeen Angus in our livestock. The sheep that we have are predominantly Clin, which, as Hywel will know, that are Welsh sheep. We select genetics from our bulls. We select genetics, as you call EBVs, for the best grass conversion. So we are selecting for grass conversion and grass fattening. And also ease of carving, because our aim is to carve outdoors. We would have carved outdoors this year, but unfortunately Storm Arwen put paid to a lot of our fencing, so we've had to postpone that plan. So we're commercial. We have commercial. Our livestock are commercial. We are getting 500 kilos within 15 to 20 months on grass only and no grain. And this is grass that is not dependent on agrochemicals. We don't use glyphosate ever. It's just naturally producing, and also it takes quite a lot more livestock and grassland management. So our cattle are literally, they're feeding on where they live. So again, that's extremely efficient, and dunging where they live, which again is a very important source of feed for biodiversity, from insects to birds. And dung is a very important source of soil conditioning as well, especially through the activities of dung beetles, for example. Well, what is new is saving 60 to 70,000 pounds a year. And that is very welcome. It makes us more profitable. What's new is the hedgerows that we are continuing to plant and to grow. What's also new is that we've noticed very quickly how our grassland bounces back with greater biodiversity on our mob grazed rotational system. So we're using grass more efficiently. We also, our farm has a much greater sense of place. When we first came to Pelham, it was very intensively grazed, it was very intensively farmed, it was intensive arable with no fences, no hedgerows. We now have got hedgerows. So we've actually got a farm that we've always loved it, but we love it even more now. And it gives a great sense of place to our community as well. Our soil organic matter, we have our soils tested. We've had every field on the farm tested. Our average soil organic matter is 8 to 12%. We have one field 21%. So while we don't have a baseline, we know that our soil organic matter and our soil conditions are good and they're improving. So selling direct is a very important part of our commercial activity. We do sell some store cattle, but most of all of our beef, apart from a small amount of store cattle, and our sheep and our pigs go through our own on-farm butchery and to a direct sale from our farm. We are very dependent on local abattoirs. We currently have to travel over 3 hours to our local abattoir. We need more abattoirs, and if perhaps I can be so bold as to suggest to the Minister that if we're expected to stand on our own 2 feet, then we need the infrastructure, we need government support. Where supermarkets can own their own abattoirs, how on earth can farmers be expected to stand on their own 2 feet in the face of supermarket demand for price reduction when we don't have access to the correct infrastructure? The way we farm is eminently scalable. It's eminently doable. It's eminently profitable. It requires more knowledge and it requires more intuition that comes with knowledge. But it's doable with government support and assistance for nature-friendly farming. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And sorry to the audience, there was a little bit of delay with the internet. One of the key things we do need to see is better rural broadband, so we can do these things a little easier. But that's a great presentation again. I've seen your journey and fascinating to hear about the savings you're making and as you've transitioned your business. So that was really good. And just sort of touching on the point around to make these farming systems work, we need the infrastructure around abattoirs and other bits, so we can transition our farming system and connect with consumers and having local abattoirs and supply and distribution points. So just for the two of you, I'm just going to ask you a couple of the questions that I've got, but also a couple of us in the panel, in the Q&A, and the rest of the Q&A we'll keep for later. So I think it's appropriate for the panel discussion. So what's been the biggest opportunities that you've seen in this transition? Because that's what it's all about, is identifying where you are and where you get to. So I will start with you, Denise, because you're on my screen. And what do you think have been your biggest opportunities in transitioning your business to deliver for our climate and our environment?
I think the biggest realization is actually, well, obviously we're a commercial business and we have to have a livelihood, is the cost saving has been the most tangible benefit, but also the sort of automatic improvement in efficiency of use. So particularly efficiency of grassland utilization. And because as farmers, we see our carcasses coming back to our farm every week, so we can see the direct results of our management, the efficiency in grassland utilization in its conversion efficiently to good, nutritious beef. And incidentally, if I can also mention an opportunity, our beef was used by Newcastle University in some research on the relationship between grazing and nutrient density. And it's absolutely unequivocal that all grass grazing, especially on biodiverse grassland, has an unequivocal improvement in nutrient density. So if we value nutrient density as a production from farming, that's another huge win-win for efficiency. So really, the answer is improved efficiencies.
Brilliant, that's really good. And Hywel?
Yeah. So basically, realizing that I can farm without these inputs, especially fertilizer and chemicals. One thing I didn't say as well was I cut back on my wormers and pour-ons in my sheep enterprise. I still use a little bit of it, don't get me wrong, but I've drastically cut back. So I'm actually saving money by actually helping climate, helping the planet, helping biodiversity. And yeah, just okay, I've done quite a bit already on my own back. I do need a stick on my back as well, just to push me to do it. Doing things voluntary sometimes doesn't get done. It's easier not to do something than do nothing. We need policy makers just to drive this ship or steer this ship, sort of thing. But you know, as a farmer, farmers, we do need somebody with a stick beating us. You know, come on, let's do it. Sort of thing. It's easier not to do something, and the being scared of failing, you know, is a worry sort of thing. But you know, I think scared or not trying something is even worse sort of thing. But no, on my farm, like my profits are up. Somebody asking a question in the chat. My profits are up. My income is down, but my profits are up. I try to work smarter. You know, I do fecal egg counts with sheep sort of thing. So, you know, check if they need worming, if they got fluke. And at the moment, they're always coming back. I don't need to do nothing, which is, I'm a bit wary of it sort of thing, because you think everybody else is buying doses, etc. I try to shear my ewe lambs, so and ram lambs as well, so I ain't got fly strikes. So there's numerous things.
No, it's really interesting, and it's a point I hear so often from so many farmers. They do need that bit of stick. They do need, because it's also about a bit of stick for those neighbours that are causing the problems, and we all know those individual neighbours usually in the landscape. And there's a lot of feels, and if there's unfairness that we are trying, but down the road it's not working. So it's how do we have governments to incentivise, but make sure there's a stick there and that's clear and transparent. You've already touched on what are some of the challenges. Is there any other challenges, Hywel, that you want to sort of raise that to make this go quicker and deliver better?
Yeah, I don't know why government is waiting for 3 years to do something. I'm not having a go for politicians, but let's start today. You know, there's climate change is happening. You know, biodiversity loss is even a bigger threat, I think. Let's do it today. Let's not wait sort of in 3-4 years. Let's have some pilot farms. Let's show it can work. Let's see it's working, and let's start today. Tomorrow, you know, day after is too late for me. Yeah.
Thank you. And Denise, a quick response on that. What are the challenges?
So I think a very big challenge is not sufficient government support and policy behind what we're doing. We really need government, to start being led by the evidence, to stop being influenced by greenwashing. And we need government to really get behind nature-friendly farming to make the changes. Farming has got one of the greatest potentials to address issues of biodiversity loss and carbon stabilization. Please, devolved governments, get behind your farmers with your policy and with your support. That's a very big plea, because what we're doing is scalable and it's possible and it's profitable.
Lovely, thank you very much. There are some other questions in the chat. You may want to individually answer them. I was going to give you the question, what are we waiting for? But I really think you've already covered that in what you're doing. Just to remember, the network represents organic, conventional farmers right across the UK, all on different positions. 2 amazing farmers doing great things, but there are many farmers just starting out on this journey involved with the network. I'd just like to thank you two for your presentations, and to Ellie for the bit, and then we'll hand over to Alison to chair the next part of the panel and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Fascinating to hear from those working on the ground and delivering this through their farming businesses every day. What I'd like to do now is to introduce the panel session and let you know how we're actually going to be running this. So first of all, I'll introduce the people that we have on the panel. We will then ask them a bespoke question each, just to sort of learn a little bit more about their various things that they are actually doing and what they would like to cover. And then we will go on to the Q&As that are coming in from yourselves. Please do keep them coming. Please put them in the Q&A question boxes there. We've got some good ones coming already, and it would be brilliant. It's your opportunity to ask the panel what you would like to know more about farming and climate change. So just to let you know who is on the panel for this time, and I think we will probably be changing to panel view in a minute as well, so you can see everybody. So we remain with Martin here from UK Chair of Nature Friendly Farming Network, but also arable farmer down near Cambridgeshire. We have Dr. Prysor Williams, and who has come, who's part of Bangor University, but also a farmer in his own right. We have Helen Keys, an arable farmer from Northern Ireland. So she will discuss her views on marketplace and the role of supply chains in supporting the sector's transition. We have Ellie, Brodie, who you've already met, who has put the report together for us, and she will talk about direction of travel for us. And then also very grateful thanks for Victoria Prentis, Minister for Farming, Food and Fisheries, who is joining us today to give us an overview from a UK perspective, but I think is an absolute very valuable that she's joining us on the panel today, so she can hear what everybody else is saying, but also that they can put across what is happening from a UK government point of view as well. So thank you very much indeed, Victoria, for joining us today. So first of all, I'd like to go down to the individual panel members. And Martin, I have a question for you to start with, if that's all right. Across the UK, agricultural payments are changing, but each country is different in the speed and scale of its transition. What do you think are some of the challenges and opportunities within farming in terms of urgently addressing the climate crisis?
Thank you. We know much of the policy is changing, much of our weather is changing, and we're going at different speeds and different paces in different places. But what we do know is farming with nature and working with nature as an asset on a landscape makes us a more profitable farming system. So taking action now and delivering those solutions that improve your farm business and your resilience will allow that business to be more profitable in the future with whatever schemes come and how they do. We know funding is moving across the UK in the direction of public money for public goods, so that biodiversity, the other assets you deliver, other than the marketplace rewards, you should get some support for. But I do feel many farmers are sitting waiting for those schemes that are going to come in years to come, rather than taking the solutions and actions now, because they've been so bedded in with the current payment system, they're scared of trying something different. And it's about using the network and other organisations to show and demonstrate what can be done. And this report that Ellie's pulled together for us and the Nature Friendly Farming Network is really trying to drive that forward. So thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Next, I'd like to go over to Dr. Prysor Williams. Obviously, you're lecturing in environmental management at Bangor University. You're farming in your own right as well. So how is climate change actually affecting farming businesses?
Thanks, Alison. I get to talk to a lot of farmers up and down the country, giving various in various discussion groups and so on. And I'm also a board member of Farming Connect, which is a very large programme tasked with upskilling Welsh farmers and so on. And through discussions over many years with farmers, it's been very noticeable to me that there is a big change happening in the whole discussion around climate change and so on. I'm sometimes probed with some really challenging questions and really robust questions by farmers. There's no doubt that more and more farmers now are thinking about climate change and how it's going to affect them and how they are affecting it as well, their role to play. There's no doubt that they're more and more aware and sensitive to challenges by consumers, by public, their customers at the end of the day, and obviously the changing direction of agricultural policy. So just to give one or two examples, I can readily reel off quite a few, but for instance, there's a lot of interest now in planting trees and agroforestry as a way to reduce the losses caused by extreme weather during lambing seasons in the kind of upland areas that I live in. So you know, that is one example. Another one I would say is the wide-scale adoption of multi-species lays, because farmers know that they are more resilient to both drought events and very wet events, and we're obviously expecting to see many more of those. So there's changes happening on the ground, and there's certainly much more interest by the agricultural community in this whole discussion.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Ellie, if we can come over to you next, please. What actions can farms get cracking on with now, and what might they need to wait for the government or other investment to help them with otherwise?
Okay, thanks, Alison. Well, I think it's important to say there's quite a wide spectrum regarding those farmers who are acting for climate change. So we know from kind of recent DEFRA statistics that just 56% of farmers reported that they were currently taking action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from their farm. So we're looking at just over half basically acting now. And of that 56%, the most common actions taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on farm were recycling of waste materials, improving energy efficiency, and also significantly, but fewer, were improving nitrogen fertilizer application accuracy. So given what I kind of talked about, earlier around some of the biggest emissions and the big actions, what we're actually seeing, the big actions that might make a difference, what we're seeing in terms of what farmers are actually currently doing doesn't necessarily match. So I think it's probably fair to say that there's quite some distance to go, and maybe an important place to start is that kind of 44% of people who reported currently taking no action, and remembering that of those people not taking action, the most common reason was because they weren't sure what to do because there were too many conflicting views. So I think what we can do is kind of for everybody is to start with what we do know and what is certain, and from that point kind of get cracking with some action. So just to say some kind of knowns and some certainties, well, we know that the climate is changing. We know that there are more extreme weather events, and we know that farmers are on the front line of this. We know that there is government legislation and targets. We've got legally binding targets in England on nature's recovery and across all UK governments on net zero. So those two exist. We know that consumer preferences are changing. Around 2/3 of people now would consider eating less meat, which is around double of that in 2014. And we also know, having heard, the great presentations from Denise and Hywel today, that nature can help your farm business. Denise showing that, she's making a saving of between 60 and 70k a year. I mean, that's significant. So I'd say, take these certainties and act, and be confident about acting. Don't expect more certainty to come, just go for it. Now, if you're at the start of the journey, I'd say, a great place to start would be to make a plan. There are suggestions in the report that we've released today about this, ideally a whole farm plan, but maybe consider as well, to get going, separate plans for nutrient management, soil management, maybe a carbon audit as well. And there's lots of free tools out there, some of which we talk about in the report. And also, I guess, just harnessing nature and seeing it as, as an asset. And finally, really staying up to date, look at what incentives are out there and go and get them. The DEFRA Farming blog is a really useful place for finding out information in England on that. And some people like Jonathan Baker on Twitter, he's great at putting out the kind of most recent government announcements. So just say, that's probably a summary of what I'd be suggesting at the moment.
Lovely, thank you. I think it's a case of reviewing where we are and then what we can potentially look to doing at different levels, isn't it? Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Helen, obviously you're an arable farmer in Northern Ireland. If you want to share any of your experiences around this, but would really like to know from your perspective, what is the role of a consumer and the supply chain in supporting agricultural transition?
Thanks, Alison. Before I dive into that question, I'd like to say a wee bit about my own background, because I feel like I've got a little bit of imposter syndrome when you call me an arable farmer. We're tiny. We're 50 acres in County Tyrone, and in some ways we're coming from the other end in that our farm is very nature friendly. It's not very productive, and I think we have a different challenge ahead of us, a slightly different challenge. But it's how can we become more productive and more profitable, but maintain all of that good nature friendly stuff that we have going on. So I mean that was our real challenge. We inherited the farm about 12 years ago and weren't expecting it. We'd no plan for it. It wasn't part of the sort of grand career plan at all. And we very quickly found out that we were working really hard, constantly worried and stressed about it, and making no money out of it. So we had to really think about how we could do something about that, and that led us to set up. I mean, our big challenge was what can we grow in our really heavy clay acidic soil, and you know, we'd no idea if there was a market for it, if people would want to buy it, which is bringing me to the supply chain question that you asked me. So with some support from Innovate UK, which was brilliant, we set up SourceGrow. So SourceGrow is basically, it's a place, a platform where, you know, people like us, farmers like us, who are trying to decide what to do, basically in the dark, can get some advice about what we can grow, and you know, what we can grow sustainably, that's going to suit our soil, but more importantly, that there's a direct local market demand for. So on the platform, you know, chefs can place orders from a whole load of us, from multiple growers who have come together, and then we go out, pick it up and deliver it to the restaurant. So, you know, it's quite a simple model, and it's very, very early days for that. But just for anybody who's interested, there's an open source database of crops that we can grow. You know, I'm based in Northern Ireland, but I'm pretty sure there's not that much difference. So crops that we can grow that suit our climate and that people want to buy. So that's available for anybody to have a look at, and it might provide some inspiration. So, you know, going back to the supply chain question, the evidence of consumer demand for sustainable produce is absolutely already there, and that direction of travel is very clear. So the consumers, to me, are already doing their bit. Anybody who follows, you know, consumer insights in the food industry will know that. It's no accident that we're seeing movement on these things from all the big players already, and for a long time in this sort of direction. It's because it makes commercial sense to do what consumers want. And we've heard lots of evidence in the workshops over the last couple of days about that consumer demand for sustainable produce. There was somebody yesterday said 88% of UK consumers are looking for more sustainable produce, so it's clear. And you know, we see that now feeding into the supply chain. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago where Mintel were, you know, clearly advising the big food brands that eco scoring of some kind, those kind of labels, are inevitable, and that, you know, those are going to, greenwashing will be exposed by those kind of labels. And you know, Mintel are very clearly advising their companies that it's time to look at strategies that will have real impact, and you know, looking at limiting carbon emissions linked to agriculture and so on. So I think those things are going to be really important in terms of transparency. And you know, for me, the really encouraging thing about listening to that from you know, Mintel was that, you know, how I shop actually really does make a difference. And you know, we do have power as consumers to make a change, and I think consumers are already doing that. And just, you know, my experience when I was setting up SourceGrow, which is early days, but you know, we did a lot of talking to chefs, and I was absolutely overwhelmed by their response in terms of, you know, they all want to buy locally, they want to buy good quality seasonal produce, and they're absolutely tuned in to the environmental impact, and they want to make really good choices. They were coming back to me saying, have you read this book, and have you, you know, look at this website? And you know, the demand from there was really clear, and most importantly, they want really good food, and you know, getting it somewhere down the road as fresh as it can possibly be is going to be the best way to get that. It's going back to Hywel's, you know, supply chain. The shorter you can make it, the better the produce is going to be at the other end. But you know, there are challenges for them in that. There's practicalities, you know, like the time they have to spend going out and finding individual growers who are growing sort of lots of different things. They're building lots of different relationships with growers, which has taken up time from them. The supply, they were telling us the supply is inconsistent. You know, they were having then loads of people delivering at all hours of the night and day. People are walking in through the restaurant with, you know, in the middle of service and that kind of stuff. And, you know, they're getting their receipts written in the back of envelopes. So, you know, there's challenges for the chefs in trying to buy locally, but that's easy to iron out. You know, if we come together and organize ourselves, and that's what we're trying to do with SourceGrow, at a sort of localized level, we can straighten all of that stuff out, and it works really well when we get local growers and local cooperatives coming together. And we now have like all these amazing platforms that you can access, things like, you know, Big Barn, the Open Food Network, you know, which is open source platform for any of us to use. Neighbour Food, absolutely amazing model. That can be replicated again and again and again. And, you know, the text there, the digital platforms there, it's all set up. And then I think, you know, you've got huge potential through the likes of equilibrium markets who are looking at dynamic procurement systems and so on. So there's loads more, there's loads of opportunity there with that kind of tech that will allow us and enable us to make those sort of local supply chains happen. But just to finish off on that, the other big challenge really that the restaurants set back to us was that, you know, there's loads of stuff they want to buy that we're not growing. And that's especially true in Northern Ireland, where it's 95% grass, you know. So that's, you know, the restaurants are, you know, they're coming back to me going, we want, you know, locally grown, and we want spelt, and we want lentils, and we want, I'm delivering chickweed tomorrow to a restaurant, you know, if I can find it. Under the snow will be a challenge, but that's the way it works. And they understand that, you know, sometimes things are available and sometimes they're not. But, you know, what we're doing to try and help that is feeding that information back down the line to our growers and saying, you know, we have chefs that want this and that and the other. So, you know, at the start of the season, they're able to plant to meet, you know, with some kind of market intelligence. And I think that's a really important part of the supply chain, is feeding that intelligence back down it, so that we're not operating in the dark anymore, that we have some intelligence to work from.
And I think that's really, really valid, Helen, from what you're saying. I think the fact that it is farming systems, and it's also what we can do, but it's also the impact of the consumer and what the changes might be within diet and what they're heading for. What I'd like to just pop over, I'll come back to you again in a moment here, is just to bring in Victoria at this point, please, if you're happy to join us there. Victoria, it would be really good if you'd just like to give us a bit of an overview, you know, of where are we going in this direction from a UK-wide perspective in terms of climate change? Are you able to give us an overview? Because I know we've got lots of questions coming in for everybody, but it would be lovely to see that overview from you.
Brilliant. Well, this is a really inspiring session, and I must say I found the report when I read it earlier really inspiring too, and it's great that you've been able to bring everybody together like this to share not just best practice but also emerging practice, which frankly we farm too. I am learning things this morning that I will go and have a go at, and I think that message is one that I've heard very powerfully. The messages that I am taking away from today are of course, my personal obsession is with herbal lays, and I'm glad to know that others share that predilection. The message of cost saving, which was a really, really loud and clear one, particularly from Denise, but also from Hywel. I also stopped worming automatically about 5 years ago, Hywel, and we've never looked back. Before that, we used to worm everything, including the children, practically. So yeah, that's always a good message. And so yes, it's great to be here. I know that's not really what you asked. What you asked is an overview of where we are. This is very much where DEFRA's head and energy and both regulation and carrots and sticks, let me put it that way. I think there is a place for sticks, yes, but there is probably a larger place for carrots in persuading those of us who farm, and many of you are way ahead of me personally on some of this sustainable farming. There is a place for persuasion. And we are finding with our agricultural transition in England, which of course we've now, since we left the Common Agricultural Policy, we've been able to take more control of. We are finding that farmers are willing, they are of course challenged, it's difficult, change is difficult. We've been infantilized by BPS payments for all of my sort of farming lifetime and rather longer in fact. And this is a period of significant change for us. But the really good news is that people are getting on board. And the best evidence I can give you for that is the enormous uptake, 40% uptake in countryside stewardship. Farmers will, I saw a question earlier, farmers will absolutely not be penalised for early adoption. We want farmers to get with the new programmes, and countryside stewardship is an easy and accessible and indeed trusted way to do that at the moment. So yes, climate change is at the heart of what we're looking at in DEFRA, but I would also say, as I always do, that there are two other not unrelated pillars that are equally important. One, of course, is food production, aiming for about 60%. The NFU are happy with that figure. I'm comfortable with that figure myself. I'm very keen that we do all we can to promote British food and farming. That is, of course, the sustainable thing to do. The shortness of the supply chain both leads to higher visibility and transparency in what we're producing, but also is generally good in ecological terms. And then the other part of what the other really important pillar is not arguing with the climate change one necessarily, but is very important to what we're doing in DEFRA, which is biodiversity and nature. Heard Martin talk about that on the telly last night. Really important that we continue to maintain that this doesn't always argue with the climate change objectives, but it does mean that you have to balance the three of those, as we all know as farmers, every day in every decision we make practically. So yes, we are very keen on the work that's been done in DEFRA. Yes, we are learning from real experiences of Denise and Hywel and indeed Helen and others who have spoken this morning. And happy to answer any more detailed questions if you want me to about mobile abattoirs or whatever you like.
That's lovely. Thank you ever so much, Victoria. Yes, we have got quite a few questions coming in. I'm looking at the time, so we're going to see what we can motor through for everybody on the panel. But just really quickly to Victoria, obviously you mentioned that some of those references are back to the England system. Are you sort of seeing that view from a UK as a whole, you know, that similar sort of things? I know there will be different approaches in the devolved nations as well.
Agriculture is devolved, so insofar as I have control or I have the levers, they are English levers broadly, but we do meet regularly as a group of nations as agriculture ministers. And I was quite heartened by the, if I'm allowed to talk about the Oxford Farming Conference for a minute, sorry. I was quite heartened by the panel discussion yesterday morning at the other conference going on with the Northern Irish and the Welsh ministers, as well as my Secretary of State, George, that people were broadly singing from the same hymn sheet. Where there is a difference, and I think we have to accept this, is in speed and urgency. And both George and I feel very strongly that yes, we have to do this in a transitional and iterative and a careful way, working with farmers, but yes, we also have to blooming well get on with it. And that is what the countryside stewardship option is really for at the moment. We cannot roll out the policies any quicker than we're doing, and we have to get them right. We have to pilot them and test them and work with farmers. These are complicated issues, and we shouldn't forget that for a minute. But the more people we can get involved at the beginning of this journey, the better. And the more we can do as government to provide carrots, the better.
Brilliant, thank you ever so much. Just really quick sort of one to you. Where do you think UK agriculture is going to be in 10 years' time?
I think we will be producing at least 60% of the food we eat. I think we will have a really good labelling system, to touch on something Helen said, which will mean that consumers who over the course of the pandemic have thought a lot more about the food supply chain will be much, much more aware of what they're consuming. I think we will, as taken as read, share space with nature on our farms. I think in terms of the landscape, there will be areas that are spared. I think that much more peatland will be re-wetted, but I very much hope that many more farms will frankly look like Denise's and Hywel's.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Well, you've got a lot of questions coming in, and so I'm going to try and get through as many as we possibly can. So just a quick run to all of the panel. As we come through with the questions to you, which I will try and share out equally amongst everybody, can I ask that it's no more than a sort of a minute on replies, please, so we can get through as many. There's lots of great comments coming in, and we really will try and cover as many as we possibly can for you. So let's have a look here. We've had a question here, understanding that regenerative methods would not use artificial fertilizers. And she says, this is from Cheryl, and she's surprised to hear, Martin, that you're still using artificial inputs. Martin, would you like to sort of say what you're doing and where you're going with that, please, from your arable farming point of view?
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, I'm not organic. We've gone from a fully conventional heavy cultivation system to a regenerative direction. I've removed all my artificial phosphate, potash, 40% of my nitrogen. We plan to be in 5 years' time not using artificial nitrogen as well. Putting in herbal lays, bringing manures in, which have that complication with the water directive in England around autumn application. And how do we put it in a balanced way? So yes, I'm still using, like most farmers, or the majority of farmers still do, but how do we shift them? Artificial nitrogen is the biggest carbon emitter, and the biggest problem I have in my own net zero journey. So it's about how do we cut it without cutting my own financial throat really out of my business. And I need to transition my soil, bring in livestock, and build the infrastructure to my business.
Lovely, thank you very much. The next question I'd like to put to Prysor, please. We've had a question coming in from Rob. Do you believe that regenerative, nature and climate positive farming should be market-led or policy and government support-led?
That's a good question. I think ultimately farmers respond to two major drivers, don't they? The market and policy. You know, they govern why we have the farming systems that we do, and they have done for the last 50 years. So I think it's a combination of both. It's you know, the government's putting the right incentives in place because there might be some upfront costs and so on, and you know, there might be a bit of a leap of faith needed by farmers to change their practices and so on. So the right encouragements, the right levers to be pulled will facilitate that. But ultimately, farmers need customers, and if they are producing what the consumer is after, then the market should follow. I say that with a fairly big pinch of salt, because we also do live in a country where, you know, we have food is the third cheapest in the world, and everybody says food is too cheap, but nobody wants to pay any more for it. That's my view. And you know, we know that the power of the retailers. So you know, we have got to bear that in mind. And the last point, you know, what Denise and Hywel are doing, and others, many others are doing, selling direct to consumers. I think that is fantastic, really to be applauded. However, it's not going to be an option for the masses. So we need something that works for farming more broadly, and of course, you know, let people such as Denise and Hywel thrive in that environment as well.
Yep, there's going to be a variety of markets and ways of doing things, isn't there? Absolutely. Ellie, if I can come to you next. You've highlighted through the report the potential for system change, introducing livestock into arable systems. This can be for many quite a radical change, and we're wondering whether Elm's proposals and perhaps like-minded schemes that might be coming along in the devolved nations, are they going to incentivise this? And if not, why not? So if we want to just sort of this possible saying, yes, let's bring livestock in, is it a reality, and who is going to help support that as well?
Again, a great question. And I think what this is really getting at, the question is around, there's system change here, and that's what we're proposing. And I think what we're seeing at the moment in proposals for environmental land management, and we heard from George Eustace yesterday that proposals for both SFI, the Sustainable Farm Incentive, but also importantly local nature recovery, which are where most farmers, those are the two schemes that are going to be available to most farmers. You know, the third scheme, landscape recovery, is really, you know, it's more, my understanding of it, it's more a project-based kind of scheme. And I think with the way that ELMS is being put forward is an evolution rather than a revolution. And we see that with local nature recovery, which is going to be a kind of continuation of countryside stewardship. So I think what I'm not clear about, I don't think there's clarity on yet, is how these kind of more systemic changes and more innovative and mixed systems are going to be supported in future incentive schemes. Maybe Minister Prentis.
Do you mind if I come in, Alison?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to bring you next. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Well, Ellie described it very well. We are working on it, truthfully. So one of the really important points that I take from today's report is the whole farm approach, and that's something that you touched on very well in your presentation. That, I think, will be at the heart of where we go with the agricultural transition. But we, frankly, and most farmers are not ready to do that right now today, though we would encourage people to take the steps that you set out in your report. We're still very much at the stage with some farms of mapping what's in the soil, and that is already part of the very earliest part of the SFI, our early schemes that are out there at the moment. So we would encourage farmers to do that. We're also bringing in short order the animal health and welfare pathway. Again, that is a way of looking at a whole area of your farming practice and working out what changes you need to make. But these are steps along the way, and I think that's the right way to describe what we're doing in this evolution. But what I'm keen to do as a policymaker is not to hold people back, but to encourage people to go as fast as they possibly can. And that's really why we're putting so much effort into the countryside stewardship route at the moment.
That's great. And actually, Victoria, while you're there, we've had another question come in saying farmers are often nervous about starting new things and looking at new schemes and whatever it might be, and also the impacts that it might have upon something else that they're doing. What can the government do to reassure farmers this won't be an issue and that they can make that start, and they're not going to be penalised if they're in other schemes or wanting to switch over? Can you give any sort of, confirmation around that?
Yeah, we have been infantilized by CAP, and we have also, all of us, I think, been quite frightened by really stringent penalties when we've measured the hedge wrong or ploughed a bit of set aside by accident, or we've all got personal examples of when we've been really worried that we won't get our public money. I am very keen that we move away from that sort of system. And while of course we will have proper and stringent regulation in place, the effort at the moment is all going into holistic, whole farm, carrots, not sticks. And that is being done for a reason. It is so that we take responsibility for our own farms and our own actions as a whole, and move our mindset from one that just takes subsidy towards a new way of working with government as a, I hope, useful partner in encouraging the regenerative farming that really farmers want to do.
Brilliant, thank you ever so much indeed. I'd like to just pop a question over to Helen now, please. Climate action and nature-friendly farming, what does this mean for food security and food production? It's a big question.
Yeah, well, I think those two things are quite clearly interlinked, aren't they? In that, everything that we've been talking about in terms of producing food more sustainably and shortening the supply chains as much as we possibly can surely improves and increases our food security. Everything that we've been saying in terms of labelling and being transparent about our food and where it comes from and how it's grown and what's gone into it, surely that also increases food security. So I feel those two things are absolutely hand in hand, really.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin, we've got another one coming back for you here. From Abigail, as a layperson who is very concerned about climate emergency and farming practices in their local area, what's the most effective way for me to engage with farmers and encourage them to change? She feels very disconnected from them and wants to know how she might be able to get more sort of working alongside farmers.
Something I hear regularly from many members of the public. I get contacted daily, if not weekly, by them. How can they support and engage with their local farmers? You know, sometimes it's for the negative reasons, but often it's a positive. So is your local farmer producing some goods that you can purchase? Could you offer them some help, you know, and reach out to those or other groups, and like I've done on this farm, is get the community come and plant hedges and trees. Can you, as a farmer, and I encourage farmers to open up their farms to have visits round, and go and, if you know, if you're a member of the public and you know and you see a local farmer, go and say what you like them see. If there's some hedge management that's been good, you will see regularly gets cut. It needs cutting in a periodic time. But if there's a wildflower margin or something you like, go and say thank you to, not thank you as you need to, but engage with your farmer and welcome them for what they're doing for your community and the landscape. And actually many farmers, you know, there are lots of grumpy buggers out there, politely put in, that won't want to engage, but lots of them actually do and want to. And that we need to build these relationships between the consumer, the farmer, the land manager, and adjusting what we do and the outcomes we have. So yeah, do reach out if you can. And if you have any problems, reach out to the network. We're always keen to help build links between public and farmers.
That's lovely. I know there's still a lot of questions where they're sort of directed at particular panelists. If you're happy to try and answer those in the chat and the Q&A, so we can still get through as many as possible. Just coming back to Victoria then, we've been asked by the Burgess family, should there be public funds to enable each farm business to assess their current greenhouse gas and biodiversity status and create their own roadmaps to become greenhouse gas and biodiversity positive? So Victoria, do you want to?
Right, so we're starting with soil mapping, and there are public funds in the pilot that we're running at the moment with 1,000 farmers in it for soil mapping, and that is absolutely something I think we should be paying for. With other forms of carbon capture, to put it in the broadest sense, we are working, we've got 31 tests and trials at the moment, working on how we assess, different ways of how we assess both reduction in emissions and also carbon sinks, essentially. So many of them are focused on ways in which in the future farmers will be able to work with private finance as well as government subsidy in order to support the work that we will, I hope, be doing in carbon capture terms. So the answer is yes, I think this is a relevant area for government to be involved with and to help farmers with. No, we're not quite there yet. Yes, we're testing how we get it right, because I've noticed in the chat there are quite valid concerns about greenwashing and fraud, frankly. And this is a very difficult and important area. It will be one of the things that I think it is most important that we get right. So let me have my tests, please. Then my colleague Lord Bennion is working closely with a wide range of people to make sure that we set the right standards and set the right tone for farmers receiving money for storing carbon, essentially. But I do think, I mean, the agricultural transition is obviously my focus at the moment. That in itself is challenging and difficult for both us in DEFRA and for the farming world. But I think that the challenges we're facing in this will pale to look insignificant compared with getting the carbon storage payment system right, and indeed labelling in a way that is meaningful for consumers. So those are the two big next challenges on my horizon, definitely. And I hope that we're doing the work that we need to be doing with farmers to make sure that we put in place the building blocks to make sure we get the policies right on those two.
And I think sort of something that's come back to us through the network and others is and I know the things have to go through, but the sooner they can get that information to help them do that planning, then they will, they very much appreciate
absolutely that. I agree. I think these are, well, both the labelling challenge, which shouldn't be underestimated either, and the green financing challenge are really, really important areas. And we welcome this network and others' views on that.
Thank you. We're coming to a close, and I know it's a very prompt cut off at 12:30. So I'm just going to go really quickly to panelists, one-line answers if we can. What are you waiting for with this climate action challenge that we have? Prysor, would you like to give me your thoughts? But we do only have a couple of minutes left.
Okay. I think it's the right carrot, essentially. The carrots are on the way, but maybe they're not quite in the shape or size or form that we need as yet.
Lovely. Ellie?
I am perhaps naively or optimistically waiting for an integrated, coherent land use framework from government which drives incentives and regulation for all farmers and our managers to help them reach net zero.
Thank you. Helen?
I think I'm in a really lucky position, and I think small farms like mine, where we're a bit more agile and lean and can easily make changes, that we're not hugely invested. I think we should be the ones to get started, or have already started.
And Victoria?
We've got one chance to get this right. Please bear with us and help us as we make that journey.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Martin a second and to wrap the session up, but thank you for all the questions. We know we haven't got through anything. We will, through varying means, capture these and get back to you with answers to everyone that has asked. Martin, what are you waiting for?
I'm not waiting. I'm trying to get on with as much as possible now. It's making the best business decisions I can now. Do go and look at the report. There's some good practical steps and a page to take action yourselves. So get on with it. Go and look on our website. And also, if you're not a member of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, or either a member of the public and organisation or a farmer, please do join. It's free. We want to work together to make action happen and really empower farmers to take the best possible decisions. Thank you very much for the session. Thank you all for the panellists, particularly for the Minister, for joining us today. It's really grateful to see your support for the network and to see this network grow right across the UK. So thanks very much. Do take some positive actions yourselves and have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.